All right, we're back. Welcome to Module 3, where we're talking about protein, what I call nature's muscle builder. So let's look at the primary roles of protein. We have, protein's primary job is to build and maintain muscle mass. Pretty straightforward. It also improves fullness, or a term called satiety, and some new research has actually shown may help with fat loss. And then another thing to keep in mind is protein is an inefficient energy source. So I want to emphasize that, but really look at what it does do. Builds muscle, helps fill you up, and of course many other factors and roles as well, but those are the two primary ones, and we'll talk much more about that now. When we look at what people are eating and how much protein they're eating and what it does, well, first of all, we'd have to break it down even further. And protein is made up of something called amino acids, and there's 20 amino acids, 20 unique amino acids, I should say. And 9 of these are what are called essential. And essential means that your body can't make them. So we have to get them from the diet. Now, that means there's 11, if you could do that math, that are non-essential. Doesn't mean they're unimportant, but our bodies make them. Now, we get a variety of amino acids from different foods. So if you eat a piece of fish versus a piece of chicken, both have what are called complete amino acids, complete proteins. So they have all 20 amino acids, just in different ratios. Every protein is going to be slightly different. So we keep that in mind when we're thinking about the proteins we eat. Again, they're all made up of amino acids, but depending on the type of protein determines the amino acids that make it up. So something like a vegetarian source, like beans, for example, provide a decent source of protein, or nuts, but they're not complete protein. So they're missing or low in one amino acid or another. We'll get to more about that in just a second. So there's also some what I call special amino acids. And those are what are called the branch chain amino acids, or the acronym is BCAAs. You may have heard of this in the supplement world, and we'll actually touch more on that in the supplement module. So these three are leucine, isoleucine, and valine, and they may have some unique properties that the other amino acids don't have. And it doesn't mean that supplementing them with them will go above and beyond and help an athlete get better, but it's an important piece to the puzzle when we think about proteins and amino acids, because there are some, again, like I said, that have maybe some unique benefits, unique components. So what are protein needs? And this is a really, really hot topic right now in the research world. We could talk about specific needs in terms of the RDA, and which I think is too low, or the general consensus of how much protein should we be eating. But there's another piece to it that's really, really important, and it's how much protein we're eating, but when we're eating that protein. So when we think about the RDA, which is, again, it's low, but I'll give you the number, it's 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. That's for just general. Remember, the RDA is not for optimal performance at all. It's basically to prevent deficiency. Don't go below that to prevent deficiency. Otherwise, you'll be deficient in those essential amino acids. Now, for athletes, the numbers go up a little bit higher, 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight. Honestly, I think there's an even easier way to figure it out, because how many people are thinking about their body weight in kilograms and let's multiply it by certain numbers? It's hard for people to understand that. So what I want to think about is, one, there's right now the recommendation from the Institute of Medicine is actually a range, a percentage of your overall calories, starting as low as 10%, which is very low, upwards of 35% of your total calories, which is a huge range, depending on the needs and athlete and so on, that you're going to fall somewhere in that spectrum, and I'll touch more on that in a second. You look at the slide here, and what it is showing the average person and how they eat their protein. Well, not physically how they eat it, but how they break down their intake throughout the day. And when you look here, you see breakfast, so typically the first meal of the day, you're breaking the fast, right? People are eating around, on average, 12 grams of protein in the morning, on average. For lunch, about double that. For dinner, about 3 times that. So about a third of the protein is coming in the morning compared to dinner. The problem with this is it's a very out of balance intake. As you can see, very low breakfast, very high dinner, and the lunch somewhere in between with just a tiny bit for snacks. Well, we don't store protein. In the last module, in carbohydrate module, I talked how we store carbohydrates as glycogen. Well, we don't store protein. In fact, protein, you use what's needed, And there's a very, very limited capacity. Some amino acids, I said you don't store, but there's a very tiny bit, an ability for those proteins to, the amino acids to stay in a pool, a holding pool essentially. But what you don't use, you'll excrete. So you use it for building, you use it for the various needs of protein, but what's not used is excreted. So think about that. If you're having a large protein dinner and you only need so much, well, then you're excreting the excess. And if you're not getting enough in the morning, then you're also not going to get the benefit that you really could from protein. So when we think about this, when we think about educating athletes and individuals about their protein needs, it's not even what they need, but it's how they eat it. That is key in terms of protein intake. It's about spreading it evenly throughout the day versus just eating protein and making sure you're getting X number of grams per day. So the current dietary pattern looks something like the top. Okay, very small protein breakfast, bigger lunch, as I mentioned, a huge protein dinner. And that kind of makes sense. Most people think about, you look at that picture on the left for the protein breakfast. It's a bagel or a scone or a muffin and a coffee maybe. And then maybe for lunch, like a turkey sandwich. And then for dinner, it's usually the steak or the chicken, a big hunk of that meat, giving you 50, 60 grams, well more than you ever need. Funny story, I was out recently with a friend and we went to a popular steakhouse and I'm looking at the menu and looking at the different options. Well, what I saw on that menu was, it was a steakhouse, like I mentioned. The smallest cut of steak on the entire menu, which was called the princess cut, was half a pound. It was 8 ounces. Half a pound gives you about 56 grams of protein because there's 7 grams of protein approximately per ounce. That's well more than we need in any one meal. And that was the smallest cut of steak on the entire menu. If you look at the optimal dietary pattern on the bottom of the slide, you see a more even distribution of protein intake. Okay, about 30 grams or so, and that's not a magic number. I will give you a range, but just to give you an idea, about 30 grams, 20 to 30 grams per meal would be much better in terms of what the body needs for maximum benefit. And I'll explain why that is. Remember, we don't store protein. So here's a list of foods that provide about that 20 to 30 grams. In general, I want you to stay within that range for most people. Now, if you're thinking, well, I have an athlete who's 250, 300 pounds. They need more protein than that, right? Well, yes, they probably do. Again, I worked with the pro football team for a long time, and I know that they needed more protein. Some of those guys were 300 plus pounds of very, very low fat and very high muscle. So what I would suggest is actually not giving them larger portions at each meal, but giving them more meals of that same 30-ish, 20 to 30 grams of protein. Here's some examples. This is a great list to hand out to clients, to athletes or those you work with, because people don't know what 20 to 30 grams looks like. And it's not just these foods you have to eat by itself, 1 cup of cottage cheese or 1 cup of Greek yogurt. It could be a combination of them. Again, so just looking at these varieties here, maybe it's the Greek yogurt plus some nuts, or oatmeal on top of Greek yogurt. Oats have some protein as well. So looking at a variety of foods, this is just an example of some ideas to help you better help your athletes. The key here is when we talk about protein, we need to think about portion control, right? So you have the picture on the right. That is a person's fist next to an 82-ounce porterhouse steak. That's a little bit big. I'm no mathematician, but people don't need about 5 pounds of beef in one sitting. Now, the person's hand is there. This is actually after a talk I gave, and I was giving this talk in Orlando, Florida, and I talked about portion sizes. Your hand, the thickness and size of your palm is about the size of protein that you need per meal. What's really cool is that it works for everybody. It's relative to you. So most hands, females, usually on the smaller size, about 3 ounces. Males, 4 to 5 ounces. Well, that would be great and perfect for how much protein you need per sitting. So you see this picture on the right of an 82-ounce porterhouse steak. I'd say it's a little bit big. 5 pounds of beef, a little bit more than anyone can handle in one sitting. And really, over a week, really, that's a massive amount of protein. A better option would be like the picture on the left. You see, as in the last modules, I showed you a plate. Well, there's a quarter of it is protein, the steak. A quarter of it is fruit. Half of it is fruit and vegetables. And then you can see some pasta noodles down there. So it's not exactly divided like I showed you, but it's about a quarter of the pasta and about a half of that fruits and vegetables with a little bit of protein. That's what we need to think about when we think about how much protein we should eat. That is called a balanced plate that can really help people meet the needs and athletes meet their needs for all the nutrients, not just protein, even though we're on that topic now. So when we look at this range here, I mentioned the range of the Institute of Medicine recommendation is 10%, you see at the bottom yellow bar, up to 35% of calories. The average person, you can see starting at 2 years old all the way up to over 71, so everyone across the spectrum of ages, the average person is eating about 12, 13, 14% of their calories from protein. So yes, within the range, but on the very, very low end of it. So what I would recommend and what most research suggests is moving up to about 25 to 30% of total calories coming from protein. Still within the range, still with the recommendations, but meeting the needs of those who have higher demands and meeting the protein needs because protein helps fill us up, protein helps build muscle as well. Now, there's one study I haven't talked about which is really, really important, and that is when we talk about protein, I gave you that number 20 to 30 grams. Well, you might be thinking, I'm putting on muscle, I have athletes who are heavily muscled, they need more protein than that. Well, this particular study looked at protein synthesis, and I'm showing you the slide right here. You can see on this slide, in this particular study, they gave people different amounts of protein to see how much they needed, what would be the highest amount of protein to benefit protein synthesis. And again, we can translate that term protein synthesis, that is necessary for building muscle. Okay? It doesn't mean all of the protein you eat will go to synthesis and you'll suddenly have bigger biceps because you ate a bigger steak. But in general, it's a part of the necessary equation. So on this slide, they had a few groups of individuals. Groups got 0 grams of protein, not surprisingly, that didn't help with protein synthesis. Or they got 10 grams of protein, that had a big jump as you can see in this graph. Or 20 grams of protein, which had about double the benefit of 10 grams, not surprising, 20 is double the size of 20. But interestingly, then they gave them 40 grams of protein, double the number of 20. And there was no additive benefit above 20 grams of protein. So what that tells us is that 20 grams or so seems to be the ceiling of maximizing protein synthesis. Remember, I told you the range, 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal. Well, that falls right into line with the protein data for protein synthesis. Now, think about the beginning of this presentation, this module, when I talked about one of the other main benefits of protein, and that is filling you up, a term called satiety. Well, let me show you this next study, that very, very new study. This particular study looked at giving people protein at breakfast. You heard me talk about that just a second ago. In fact, they gave people 35 grams of protein at breakfast. And in this particular study, it was obese teenage girls. They had them eat a few different amounts of protein, either breakfast skippers, eating no protein, 13 grams of protein, or 35 grams of protein in the form of egg and steak burritos. What they found was those eating the 35 grams of protein, they lost significantly more weight over 12 weeks, significantly more fat over 12 weeks, so not just weight, but fat specifically. And also another piece to this puzzle, it wasn't this study, but a very, very similar one, same amounts of protein. They found when they gave higher protein breakfasts, they found that the girls who ate that higher protein breakfast, they ate about 200 calories less after dinner from high sugar, high fat snacks. That's powerful. And this is only, that particular one, the study I'm talking about, is only a 7-day study. If we can increase the quality of the diet by giving more protein in the morning, and think about how powerful protein in the morning meant they ate about 200 calories less after dinner. That's amazing. So again, coming back to the message I shared, we want to make sure we are shifting our protein intake. So taking some from dinner and shifting it to the morning so it's a more even distribution throughout the day. Like I said, the range, it's 20 to 30 grams. Now, the study I just mentioned, you might be thinking, he just said 35 grams in that study. Well, that study was a little bit higher, and knowing the researcher, she had said they've showed some lower studies as lower amounts of protein were just as effective. In general, the consensus seems to be 20 to 30 grams of protein for maximum protein synthesis, for increasing fullness, and think how that could translate to better athletes. You could potentially put on muscle mass, and you could help those who need to lose weight, which is about 2/3 of the population right now. So I promise you're seeing some clients who are interested in that outcome as well. So let's take another look at some of the protein data here. And nutrient timing with protein is important when we eat our protein. Now, I talked about this in the previous module with carbohydrates. Well, we need to look at protein around training as well. When we exercise, let's say we're in the weight room, you're breaking down muscle tissue. That is called protein breakdown. Now, I used the term protein synthesis earlier. That means muscle building. Ultimately, you want synthesis to stay above breakdown so you have muscle building if that's the goal. Here are a few examples of some recovery snack ideas. And you want the protein to get in as quickly as possible after a workout. Because you broke down that muscle tissue, you want to bring that synthesis back up so you can help build. A couple cups of chocolate milk. That gives a combination of carbohydrates and protein. A cup of Greek yogurt with fruit. Again, combination of carbohydrates and protein. And Greek yogurt is different than traditional yogurt. Greek yogurt has about double the protein, so that's why I keep emphasizing Greek yogurt. Cottage cheese and fruit. Again, great source of protein here, and cottage cheese and some fruit. An energy bar, I have that in quotes because really anything that gives you calories is energy, but this is a quick, easy option. I don't want you to live off of these things. I'd rather have you eat real food, but for those on the go, this can work, and there are some better options that have more protein than others, or something simple, apple and peanut butter, even peanut butter and banana sandwich. I've used that with athletes when they're going to be done training and get on the bus and travel home. So depending on the needs, or a shake can work as well. A few different options, but you want to make sure you're getting in some protein after workout so you can perform and recover and help that muscle build. Remember, you broke it down during training, now it's time to build it back up so you can be at your peak when the next training bout comes, and throughout, you're building muscle during rest. You're breaking it down during training. So, quick summary about protein. Protein is needed to form and build muscles. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. Some sources include lean meat and fish and poultry and dairy and legumes. Of course, if you're working with a vegetarian or vegan client, there have to be some other options as well. They're built in. These are just an example. Eggs aren't on there, but certainly could be added. Beans, I mentioned, nuts, dairy, certainly lots of different options. Mix, match, the variety is the key. Fortunately, most people are eating a variety of sources of protein because remember, every protein gives you a unique combination of amino acids, so the variety is king. And then aim for about 1 handful per meal. That's around 20 to 30 grams of protein. And last but not least, spread that protein out throughout the day. Give clients, I have a sheet in the manual that shows them some examples of higher protein breakfasts, because that's where most people are missing. So show them that, give them that, and teach them how to spread that out throughout the day and talk about why it's important. So thanks so much. I'm going to be moving on to the next module, which is talking all about fat, so you can be a well-oiled machine.